The vaquero is a horse-mounted livestock herder of a tradition that originated on the Iberian Peninsula. Today the vaquero is still a part of the doma vaquera, the Spanish tradition of working riding. The vaquero traditions developed in Mexico from methodology brought to Mesoamerica from Spain also became the foundation for the North American cowboy. The vaqueros of the Americas were the horsemen and cattle herders of Spanish Mexico, who first came to California with the Jesuit priest Eusebio Kino in 1687, and later with expeditions in 1769 and the Juan Bautista de Anza expedition in 1774. They were the first cowboys in the region. In the modern United States and Canada, remnants of two major and distinct vaquero traditions remain, known today as the Texas tradition and the Spanish vaquero or California tradition. The popular horse whisperer style of natural horsemanship was originally developed by practitioners who were predominantly from California and the northwestern states, clearly combining the attitudes and philosophy of the California vaquero with the equipment and outward look of the Texas cowboy. The natural horsemanship movement openly acknowledges much influence of the vaquero tradition. The cowboys of the Great Basin still use the term vaquero, which may be a corruption of vaquero, to describe themselves and the tradition. Etymology. Vaquero is a Spanish word for a herder of cattle. It derives from vaca, meaning cow, which in turn comes from the Latin word vaca. A related term, buckaroo, still is used to refer to a certain style of cowboys and horsemanship most often seen in the Great Basin region of the United States that closely retains characteristics of the traditional vaquero. The word buckaroo is generally believed to be an anglicized version of vaquero and shows phonological characteristics compatible with its origin. Buckaroo first appeared in American English in 1827. The word may also have developed with influences from the English word buck or bucking, the behavior of young and trained horses. In 1960, one etymologist suggested that buckaroo derives, through gala bakra, for the Ibibio and efik, mbakara, meaning white man, master, boss. Although that derivation was later rejected, another possibility advanced was that buckaroo was a pun on vaquero, blending both Spanish and African sources. History. The origins of the vaquero tradition come from Spain, beginning with the hacienda system of medieval Spain. This style of cattle ranching spread throughout much of the Iberian Peninsula and later was imported to the Americas. Both regions possessed a dry climate with sparse grass, and thus large herds of cattle required vast amounts of land in order to obtain sufficient forage. The need to cover distances greater than a person on foot could manage gave rise to the development of the horseback-mounted vaquero. Various aspects of the Spanish equestrian tradition can be traced back to Arabic rule in Spain, including Moorish elements such as the use of Oriental-type horses, the jineta riding style characterized by a shorter stirrup, solid treed saddle and use of spurs, the heavy noseband, a hackamore, and other horse-related equipment and techniques. Certain aspects of the Arabic tradition, such as the hackamore, can in turn be traced to roots in ancient Persia. Arrival in the Americas. During the 16th century, the conquistadors and other Spanish settlers brought the cattle-raising traditions as well as both horses and domesticated cattle to the Americas, starting with their arrival in what today is Mexico and Florida. The traditions of Spain were transformed by the geographic, environmental and cultural circumstances of New Spain, which later became Mexico and the southwestern United States. In turn, the land and people of the Americas Americas also saw dramatic changes due to Spanish influence. The arrival of horses in the Americas was particularly significant, as equines had been extinct since the end of the prehistoric Ice Age. However, horses quickly multiplied in America and became crucial to the success of the Spanish and later settlers from other nations. The earliest horses were originally of Andalusian, Barb and Arabian ancestry, but a number of uniquely American horse breeds developed in North and South America through selective breeding and by natural selection of animals that escaped to the wild and became feral. The Mustang and other colonial horse breeds are now called wild, but in reality a feral horse is descendants of domesticated animals. 18th and 19th centuries. The Spanish tradition evolved further in what today is Mexico and the southwestern United States into the Vaquero of northern Mexico and the Charro of the Jalisco and Michoacán regions. Most vaqueros were men of mestizo and Native American origin, while most of the hacendados were ethnically Spanish. Mexican traditions spread both south and north, influencing equestrian traditions from Argentina to Canada. As English-speaking traders and settlers expanded westward, English and Spanish traditions, language and culture emerged to some degree. Before the Mexican-American War in 1848, New England merchants who traveled by ship to California encountered both hacendados and vaqueros, trading manufactured goods for the hides and tallow produced from vast cattle ranch. American traders along what later became known as the Santa Fe Trail had similar contacts with vaquero life. Starting with these early encounters, the lifestyle and language of the vaquero began a transformation which merged with English cultural traditions and produced what became known in American culture as the cowboy. Mesteros were vaqueros that caught, broke and drove mustangs to market in the Spanish and later Mexican, and still later American territories of what is now northern Mexico, Texas, New Mexico and California. They caught the horses that roamed the Great Plains and the San Joaquin Valley of California, and later in the Great Basin. For the 18th century to the early 20th century, modern America, distinct regional traditions arose in the United States, particularly in Texas and California, distinguished by local culture, geography and historical patterns of settlement. In turn, the California tradition had an influence on cattle handling traditions in Hawaii. The vaquera or California tradition most closely resembled that of the original vaquero, while the Texas tradition melded some Spanish technique with methods from the eastern states, creating separate and unique styles indigenous to the region. The modern distinction between vaquero and buckaroo within American English may also reflect the parallel differences between the California and Texas traditions of Western horsemanship. California tradition. The Spanish or Mexican vaquero, who worked with young and trained horses, arrived in the 1700s and flourished in California and bordering territories during the Spanish colonial period. Settlers from the United States did not enter California until after the Mexican-American War, and most early settlers were miners rather than livestock ranch, leaving livestock raising largely to the Spanish and Mexican people who chose to remain in California. The California vaquero or buckaroo, unlike the Texas cowboy, was considered a highly skilled worker, who usually stayed on the same ranch where he was born or had grown up. He generally married and raised a family. In addition, the geography and climate of much of California was dramatically different from that of Texas, allowing more intensive grazing with less open range. Plus, cattle in California were marketed primarily at a regional level. without the need to be driven hundreds of miles to railroad lines. Thus, a horse and livestock handling culture remained in California and the Pacific Northwest that retained a stronger direct Spanish influence than that of Texas. Cowboys of this tradition were dubbed buccaneers by English-speaking settlers. The words buckaroo and vaquero are still used on occasion in the Great Basin, parts of California, and less often in the Pacific Northwest. Elsewhere, the term cowboy is more common. Texas tradition. The Texas tradition arose from a combination of cultural influences, as well as the need to adapt to the geography and climate of West Texas and, later, the need to conduct long cattle drives to get animals to market. In the early 1800s, the Spanish Crown, and later, independent Mexico, offered impresario grants in what would later be Texas to non-citizens, such as settlers from the United States. In 1821, Stephen F. Austin and his East Coast comrades became the first Anglo-Saxon community speaking Spanish. Following Texas independence in 1836, even more Americans immigrated into the impresario ranching areas of Texas. Here the settlers were strongly influenced by the Mexican vaquero culture, borrowing vocabulary and attire from their counterparts, but also retaining some of the livestock handling traditions and culture of the eastern United States and Great Britain. Following the American Civil War, vaquero culture diffused eastward and northward, combining with the cow-herding traditions of the eastern United States that evolved as settlers moved west. Other influences developed out of Texas as cattle trails were created to meet up with the railroad lines of Kansas and Nebraska, in addition to expanding ranching opportunities in the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain front, east of the Continental Divide. The Texas-style vaquero tended to be an itinerant single male who moved from ranch to ranch. Hawaiian Paniolo. The Hawaiian cowboy, the Paniolo, is also a direct descendant of the vaquero of California and Mexico. Experts in Hawaiian etymology believe Paniolo is a Hawaiianized pronunciation of Espanol. Paniolo, like cowboys on the mainland of North America, learned the skills from Mexican vaqueros. By the early 19th century, Captain George Vancouver's gift of cattle to Paiba, each Kamehameha monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom, had multiplied astonishingly, and were wreaking havoc throughout the countryside. About 1812, John Parker, a sailor who had jumped ship and settled in the islands, received permission from Kamehameha to capture the wild cattle and develop a beef industry. The Hawaiian style of ranching originally included capturing wild cattle by driving them into pits dug in the forest floor. Once tamed somewhat by hunger and thirst, they were hauled out up a steep ramp and tied by the horns to the horns of a tame, older steer that knew where the paddock with food and water was located. The industry grew slowly under the reign of Kamehameha's son Liholiho. Later, Liholiho's brother, Kauai visited California, then still a part of Mexico. He was impressed with the skill of the Mexican vaqueros, and invited several to Hawaii in 1832 to teach the Hawaiian people how to work cattle. Even today, traditional Paniolo dress, as well as certain styles of Hawaiian formal attire, reflect the Spanish heritage of the vaquero. The traditional Hawaiian saddle, the noholio, and many other tools of the cowboys' trade have a distinctly Mexican, Spanish look, and many Hawaiian ranching families still carry the names of the vaqueros who married Hawaiian women and made Hawaii their home.